So today, talking about materials and more specifically advanced materials. And what I want to show is really this website, and this is what we're going to get into. This website is by a company called Algorithmic, and they have what's called substance materials. And you can see these are examples of their materials. They got their background in um, creating video game design materials. That's really where they come from, and they saw an opportunity to develop into a market of architecture and doing like ArcViz kind of stuff. So the material library, it's pretty decent. It's not super comprehensive, but it's growing pretty quickly. Um, but at the same time, you'll see that one material can easily become multiple materials. If you guys have heard about doing what's it called? Never remember the name of it. Where you can model by using inputs rather than actual modeling. Can't believe I can't think of the name of it. It'll come to me. But this is doing the same thing where you can model the material just by changing inputs, and it creates the material for you. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. And just to show you some materials. I mean, this is, some example works of like all of their materials done, which is just, absolutely incredible. Let me see here. What's the website I'm looking for? I think I have it bookmarked somewhere. Okay. Again, just another example of their architecture stuff. Graphics, textures. Here we go. This is the website. I think this is it. Here we go. So these are their materials, and you can see these are so much more realistic than so many other ones. And not only are they more realistic, because I'm going to take a step back. If you guys haven't used this, there's a website called SketchUp Texture Club. This is actually a fantastic website as well, and it's very comprehensive. And you can really search just about any kind of material in here. In fact, if you go to textures, say architecture, bricks, and then even the bricks are all broken down in all kinds of stuff. Even say like old bricks. I mean, these are just fantastically created tileable materials. And the great thing is that in essence, most of them can be free. Like you'll see a lot of free ones, or you can log in. In fact, let me log in real quick. And so I do have login information for this stuff that I can provide to you guys. Just go back here. But even if you create a login, a lot of these you can actually download for free. But the nice thing with having we actually have a paid account. Like you can download this one for free, but then they have a 3 times. This is like a 3K version, if you will, that you can download a super high resolution version. And so we have that information as well, and so that I can provide you guys. So this is a great source for materials. But getting into substance materials, this is more than just downloading a JPEG. This is creating materials and manipulating materials, all that kind of stuff. And if you guys haven't ever really gotten into materials or really advanced materials, some of these terms may or may not be familiar to you, like diffuse and base color maps. So I'm going to go over some quick terms, and it's not that you really need to know these, but understanding where this stuff comes from and what it does can really help. But like a diffuse and base color is simply the underlying JPEG. It's basically what you're looking at. And really it's called a diffuse map because when light shines on it, it's what color is going to be diffused from reflections of light and that stuff, and that's really where it comes from. Um, and diffuse and base color are, for the most part, the same thing. Really, the only difference is when we get into metals, you can't use a diffuse map. You have to use a base color map, and that's its own programming thing. I don't really know why, um, but that's really the only difference. And we'll do some materials as well, so you can some metal materials as well as every other thing, and you can kind of see that. Um, and bump map, if you've ever heard of bump map, that probably is fairly familiar. It's actually one of the older techniques, but it creates simulated bumps or wrinkles on a surface of an object. Um, and really, that's a black and white or gray tone mapping material that basically tells the program that, if I'm not mistaken, I think black is up and white is down, or vice versa. I can't remember offhand. Um, or you can do the more advanced version is a normal map, which, if you've ever seen those, is that like pink and purple kind of color, and it does the exact same thing as a bump map, but in a much more advanced way. There's a larger range of capabilities to it, and normal maps are what we're going to be using. Um, and then I mean, there's a whole host of other ones that we could talk about, but aren't really going to be specific to our conversation. So I'm just going to deal with those. The other one, there's really two other ones that we need to be aware of. There's a glossiness map, which, if you're familiar with using Photoshop and creating masks, um, glossiness maps really do the same thing, as they basically create a mask, and it tells you, it'll tell the program what portion of a material is glossy and what portion is not. So if you're familiar with building a material inside of Lumion, you know that if you change the glossiness slider, it does it globally. So everything either becomes more glossy or less glossy. By adding in this glossiness map, you basically can tell Lumion that only a portion of this will become glossy and a portion won't. And again, it's a grayscale map, so you can have some things that are like pure white and super glossy, pure black and not glossy at all, or some sort of gray version. And so again, I'll show you all this later, but I just want you to be familiar with what we're talking about. And the last one is ambient occlusion, which I'm sure most of you are aware of, where basically it's also known as a dirt map, that it adds coloring, like a grayscale to the corners of objects. It really makes them stand out. And we'll get into all of those in just a minute. So really, those I mean, there's maybe like 5 or 6 other maps that Lumion at this point doesn't read, that gamers or video game designers will use, and maybe eventually Lumion will get into. We can talk about them later. But the ones we need to be aware of are diffuse and or base, normal, which is the height, glossiness, which is the shine, and ambient occlusion, which isn't always there, but will be the dirt map that we use. So after all that academic discussion, we can just grab a material and kind of start playing. This one right here is actually a really cool one to kind of show everything off. You can see that it's metal that's been rusted out. So instantly you would know that the metal itself can have a glossiness to it. In fact, I'm going to click on it, and you can see here's a generic preview that, in fact, let me go back, see if it'll stay there. Like the metal itself is glossy, the rustiness is not. And you can even see that there's some depth, as if this is paint that's been chipped off. And that all comes from the normal map, the height map that we will use. And you can see there's actually variations. This is the same material, but now there's blue painted versus silver painted. And we'll even get into how that all works. And these are the different maps. Like here's the normal map to that. Here's the base color map. Roughness we don't use, metallic we don't use, and height we don't use. So ignore those. And we'll, in fact, I'll download this right now and get into it. But here's an example. This is the exact same material, but you can see that this is a lot less rusty. And it's the idea that, yeah, I can download one material and manipulate it in many, many different ways. So to use this, there's a free program called Substance Player, and this is made by the algorithmic company that goes along with their materials. And I'll provide links and all that kind of stuff to you guys of how to download it and install it. Um, but I'm slowly trying to build up a library of these materials and really just been testing some of this stuff out. Um, let me see, what was that material called? Rusted painted metal. So right here, so this is the file that would be downloaded. It's this SBSAR file. And then you just simply open it up into here. And here's my material. And I can move this 3D box around. And, I'm getting a preview. And up here, this is a two-dimensional map preview. So these are the maps, all the maps that we just talked about. These are what would be exported out. And in fact, the channels I want to turn, since this is a metal, I'm going to leave base color on and diffuse off. I want my normal map. I don't care about specular, but I do want glossiness. I don't care about roughness. I don't care about metallic, and I don't care about height. Really, it would be 3 most of the time, or 4 would be the other time, and the 4th one would be ambient occlusion. This one doesn't have an ambient occlusion built into it, so we're not going to worry about it. And by turning those on and off, this is giving me a preview of what that material would look like using just those 3 maps. And so this is now what that material would look like. And what's nice is I can preview the different maps here. So this is the normal map, and here's my glossiness map. And this is the base color map. Now, getting into the technical aspects of this program, of how we can really adjust and tailor the materials to our need. The first thing that we can really play with is output size. Right now, this is very small, 512 by 512 pixels, which is pretty small. It's actually pretty decent for SketchUp, but just to know that SketchUp, the maximum material that you can export out is a 1024 by 1024. Anything bigger than that, and it will auto sample it down. And then if you put it into SketchUp and it auto samples down and then go to Lumion, Lumion's going to read that lower sampled version of it. So what I like to do, and we'll go through this whole process, is I like to export out a 4K version. And so this is my 4K version. And you can already see that this jumped up quite the size in preview. So I'll export out a 4K version as well as a 1K version. And so what I'll do is I'll create the 1K version to use in SketchUp, and then when I bring it into Lumion, I'll swap it out with the 4K version. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is this whole process. Excuse me. So what's nice is now every material is going to be built slightly differently. So not all of these options are going to be part of every material. So every material, again, is just slightly different, but once you get in and start playing with it, you can see what options you would have available. So one of the first things we can look at is the color, the main color that this metal was prior to being rusted. And so you can see right here, this color paint. So I can click on this and I can change the color that this thing was painted, and you can see it's automatically adjusting. So this isn't necessarily a material we would use in our projects, but this is a great one to show the capabilities of what we can do now. So we can just grab something, make it a little brighter just to give some good contrast to what we want to do. So I'm going to make it that color. And if I wanted to, I could even change the underlying rust color. I don't really want to. It's a pretty good rust color, so I'm going to leave it as is. But you could change it. But now we have all these different sliders. And we can just look at what they do, like variation. Let's see if I bump this up. Let's see what it does. It's changing. It looks like how much is eaten through right here. So you can see all of this area kind of changed. So if I bump it back down to what it was, it's almost like it's changing the contrast between it all. I can change the rust amount. You can see we're pretty high. If I drop it back down, I'm only getting small splotches of rust. So again, you have like this great control over what kind of material you really want to build. I can knock it all the way up and get like a massive amount of rust. Um, it will leave it somewhere around 2/3 where they had it. You know, just something fun to play with. The rust spreading, you can change how the rust is spreading, whether it's more isolated or eating through the paint a little bit more. It's again, it's all kind of control that you want. You can change the wetness of this, which will make it again just look wetter, and it will change your glossiness map, which we can get into. And the technical parameters will pretty much always be the same, where you can change the luminosity, the contrast, hue shift. And again, you guys should be familiar pretty much with all these terms, because they're pretty much Photoshop terms, and it's really just the output of the color of this stuff. So we're going to say that this is the material that we want. We really like this. You know, this has a pretty good preview of what we want. There's a good shot. You can see there the way that the sun is hitting this, and you're getting a good height to this, that you can see that the rust is recessed in as if the paint's been chipped away and that kind of stuff. So this whole process is going to kind of seem convoluted, but it actually is very quick once you kind of get used to it. And for the most part, that once you do one, it's kind of done. It's not like you need to do it every time. It's just more of kind of building the material library. But what we want to do is export out the background images to this, the different maps, our base color, our normal, and our glossiness. By default, it has it set to Targa. I'm going to change it just to a JPEG because we don't need super big files. And this piece right here, this tweaks value, I'm actually going to change it to an external file. And what that means is, if I open up the original file again, it'll open it up back to its original parameters, but this will export out a version with all of these adjusted settings into a new file so that we can open that up, basically our custom version of that same file. And then here under outputs, I don't need diffuse because I'm doing base color. I want my normal, I don't want specular, I do want glossiness, and I don't want the rest. So I just need those three. And then I'm just going to click export, and it's basically going to start just exporting those out. Let me see. Grab my folder. There we go. So close this. And you can see that we've now exported this out. And so this is different than my one I've already exported out because I've actually changed colors. I'm actually going to say make a new file and call this version 1. Move this here. And then we'll create another one. We'll call this one version 2. And then inside of here, I'm going to create another folder, call it 4K. And then another one called 1K. And let's grab this stuff. Now I'm going to dump all of this into our 1K, or 4K, excuse me, because this was our very large file we exported out. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drop this down to a 1K. And now when I export, since this is for SketchUp, I can't and won't use the normal or the glossiness. I just need the base color. So now I'm just going to export out a 1K version of the base color. And we will go to 1K, and I will move this into there. Now this is that file I talked about that has all of our tweaked settings. I don't want to save this 1K version because I have a copy inside of the 4K version, and so as to not have confusion, I always just keep the 4K version as the one that I tweaked, because ultimately they're the same thing. So we're just going to leave it that way. So now that I have these images, we can go play with them inside of SketchUp. I mean, really, it's going to be that easy. And we're going to get into a couple other materials, and there's other really cool features that I'll show in a second. But just to kind of take this one through the whole process. This is just a generic SketchUp model I built that has different ways of previewing materials. So we'll look at that and how it looks inside of Lumion. And so we'll grab this is our 1K version. I just want to add a version 2 at the end of this. We will plop this into SketchUp and try and get it to some sort of scale. This one is obviously not really scalable in essence, but I know that this rust piece right now measures at 2+ feet, where I don't know, I'm thinking maybe that's more like 6 to 8 inches. So we'll drop this down scale wise. You know, so that's like 4 to 5 inches. So that, I think that fits a little bit better for our scale. So, you know, if you drag and drop a material, like I just drag and dropped this JPEG into SketchUp, this right now is not anything. If I take my paintbrush, and typically if you hold Alt, it opens up this eyedropper. If you can see on the screen, the eyedropper is turning that red circle, meaning I can't do anything with it. It's technically not a material. In fact, even if I go into my why is this not, there we go, into my materials library, you see I only have these colors, which are these colors here. It's because this technically is not a material yet, but if I were to take this thing that I brought in and now explode it, it instantly turns into a material. There are other ways of doing this, like basically this method bypasses having to go through import and then importing, you know, finding the material, importing the material, and even changing the options. Actually, if I go to JPEG, like even in here, you can actually import it as an image, which is the way I imported it already. You can import it as a texture, which would make it a texture, or you can import it as a new matched photo. I tend to use the image. I think it's easier to scale ahead of time before it makes it a material. So anyway, with that said, now that it's a material, let's go ahead. I'm going to replace this this magenta color with this material. And there we have it. One of the bad things with SketchUp is UV mapping. There are better ways of doing it, but we don't tend to map a whole lot of things, so I haven't really messed with it a ton. I'm just trying to see if I can get it to map a little bit better, but you know, that's its own thing. Otherwise, it's on here and maps pretty well. So I'm just going to save this file, and we'll jump into Lumion real quick. And we will reload, and you should see this magenta color reloaded with the material. Let's swing around and see if we can get a good look at this material inside of Lumion. Yeah, let's, you know, do something like that. We'll go to our photo mode. In fact, I think oh, here we go. Yeah, so there I already have a preset photo mode. And so this is bringing in the substance material through SketchUp. So this doesn't have any good properties or anything. This is simply a low resolution SketchUp JPEG that's been brought into Lumion. But we will go ahead and render it out. I'm just going to do a quick desktop version. I'm going to delete all of these real quick, just so we're not confusing anything. And so once I go through this basic procedure, and I'm going to do another material, specifically wood, because that has some really cool features about it. Once I go through that, we're going to take kind of this overall concept of what we learned and then turn it, show you how you can use it for understanding the concepts and using the concepts for your own use and creating better materials, even no matter where you get them from. So anyway, I'm going to overwrite this and call this A1. So say, okay, so we have that image. Now we're going to come back to our build mode. And if we go to materials, I'm going to turn this material into a standard material. So right now, we're probably going to hit a medium level of material understanding and then ultimately get into advanced. So no matter what material you bring in from SketchUp, you can do this medium level of adjustments to create better materials, again, regardless of where they come from. So right now, I'm turning this into this standard material. And instantly, if you see it, it already has like this shine to it, this glossiness. I mean, you can really see it here in the ball. Everything is just very shiny and glossy. And it's because if you see here, everything comes in at an exact 1. You know, gloss is 1, reflectivity is 1, relief is 1. It's just basically the standard mode of materials. And specifically what I was talking about before, if you're looking at the top of this box, you can see how this whole box, regardless of where the paint is or the rust is glossy and reflective. That's not really what we want. That's not going to make a great material. But one thing that you can do is if you click this icon right here, if you've never used this, this will create a normal map on the fly inside of Lumion. Now, we've exported out a normal map that we are going to use, but Lumion, again, if you don't have substance materials and don't have normal maps, Lumion can create a normal map. And so we'll click the button, and in this case, you can see, if I zoom in, it looks like the rust is raised above the paint. So we're going to click it again, which will flip the normal map, and now it makes it look like the rust is recessed. So you can kind of create these normal maps on the fly, which again is pretty nice, but we're still going to have some reflectivity across the whole thing. It's a little bit better, especially you can see it here on this ball, that the sun is being broken up because of the recess. You know, where it's a little bit more solid here on the paint and broken up here. So just instantly doing that, we're already getting a better material. So we'll save that, go to photo mode, back to our same scene, and we will export this one out just so we can do comparison. I'll call this one A2. Say OK. And now we're going to get into the more advanced part of the material. And this is actually going to start in Photoshop. And this is, you're only going to have to do this one time, but we will run through the process. And most of the time you won't even have to do it because the material, once it's downloaded, whoever downloads it, especially Rebecca or I, who will be trying to put together this whole material library, would have already done this and be ready to go. But just, it's always better to understand the process of where things come from, and so that you guys can do it as well. It's not meant to be handcuffed to Rebecca or I, but it's always easier to have really a point person to manage the library. But again, I want you guys all to be aware of and the capabilities of what can and can't be done. So with that, I really only need the glossy and the normal map right now, but I'm going to bring all three in just so you can see what they are, and again, just to be aware of. Now, these are the 4K versions. These aren't the 1K, but these are the larger 4K versions, just to be aware. So if I click on base color, you can see that this is nothing more than the standard JPEG, you know, what the image actually looks like. That's all this map is. There's nothing more to it. So I'm going to close it out. And this gray version is the glossiness map. And what this is, where it's white, will be more reflective and where it's black will be less reflective. So that you can see that we're going to really start to tailor the glossiness and what's going on. So as you can imagine, the darker areas are where it's rusty. Now you can bring it in just like this and that's fine. But to then bring a little bit of an artistic level, you can always play with the like the levels uh, or whatever else and really start to amp up the contrast in these things. You know, maybe I want the darkers more dark and the whites more white, uh, which will allow for an even larger contrast in glossiness. So maybe let's do something like that. And now what I want to do is I'm going to hit Control A and select everything. If you see, everything is selected right now. I'm going to hit Control C, and that's copying it to my clipboard. And I'm actually going to be done with that. I don't need anything else with that right now. And now I'm in my normal map. And you can almost see this looks like, you know, some sort of topography map where you can see the dips and the recesses and the raised portions and all that kind of stuff. So that's what the normal map does. But we're going to add the glossiness to this map. So we're going to kind of bring it all in together. Between the glossiness and the heights are all going to be brought in under one map. And so under channels, we are going to come down here and go to add new channel. And so we're adding an alpha channel. And so while the alpha channel itself is selected, we're going to hit Control V and paste in our glossiness map. And now if I turn all of my channels back on, you can see that it now went from this purpley kind of thing to this pinky purpley thing. And so now this is embedding the glossiness inside of the normal map. And this is what we're going to use in Lumion to really take our materials to the next level. So we're going to go File, Save As. Now this is where it gets a little, not tricky, but something to be very, very aware of. We need to save this as a targa. It has to be a TGA file. And we're going to, I'm going to add in an underscore and then in capital letters, you know, with gloss. So this way I know that it's a normal map that has the gloss already built into it. So if anybody else ever comes back into this file, they know that this particular material has been manipulated and this one is the one to be used. So we save it, and the only other piece to be aware of is it has to be set to 32 bits per pixel. And once you do it, it should automatically pop up that way. But it's just those things to be aware of, that it needs to be saved as a TGA and at 32 bits per pixel. And then once that's saved, we're kind of ready to go. Again, now it seems very convoluted, but it's actually pretty easy. And if you guys have ever built scripts inside of Photoshop, I've actually built a script that does this whole process for you, so that actually goes pretty quickly. And again, once it's done, it's done. You don't need to do it every time that you need the material. So now if we come back into Lumion, excuse me, and we edit this material again, what you can do now is I'm going to come here and say choose color map, and we're going to go to our materials. Oops. And wherever you have them located, I just happen to have this particular folder set up right now, more or less temporary, while we're going to build the material library. But if we come into the rusted painted metal, and then we're working on version 2, and I want my 4K version, my base color is what I want to load in. So now what I'm going to do, ultimately what's going to happen is I'm swapping out this basically 1,000 pixel wide image by a 4,000 pixel wide image, so it's a much, much higher resolution. So we're instantly going to get a better quality image right off the bat. I mean, you can see already that it's a much better quality. I'm zooming in so you can see it. But we're also, we created this normal map on the fly inside of Lumion, but now we're actually going to swap that out with the one that we created, that has the new normal map that's custom made for this, along with the glossiness built into it. So we're going to swap that out. And now you should see it any second. It's going to go, if you remember it before, right here was glossy, but now it's not. This rust is no longer glossy, but our paint is now super glossy. So now hopefully you start seeing where things were black is where the rust was and things were white is where the paint was, and why playing with the levels and really creating contrast inside that glossiness map can really make a difference in how things appear inside of Lumion. So if we say we'll leave all that stuff on there for now, like all of these the same, and then we'll come back and do another one with making some adjustments to that stuff. So let's come back to our photo. We'll look at this, and let's take another shot, and we'll call this one our A3. And now we have one more level of adjustments that we can make, and that's really looking at the glossiness. You know, maybe this paint, I do want to have this super kind of glossiness to it, but I don't want it as reflective. I mean, it's paint, so it doesn't need to be super reflective. And the relief, you can see if I jack it all the way up, you'll see the edges really start to shine through. Or if I bring it all the way down, it'll start to look very, very flat. And so that's how you can control the depth of what the normal map actually does. So we'll bring relief. I'm going to go up to maybe about 2/3. I want to have a nice, strong look to this. And the other thing I like to do, and I do this on almost all of my materials, is I come to weathering, and I'm actually going to back up real quick. I'm going to show, let's see what weathering does on something like this before I show it on that. So I'm going to just make this one a quick standard material, and then say weathering. So you see it specifically, if I start breathing weathering up just a little bit, if you notice on the corners right here, it starts adding dirt around all the corners. So that's what weathering does. Now if I bring it up a lot, it'll start growing mold and really make this thing look, you know, pretty weathered. So this is like adding another level of detail and that kind of stuff. And you can switch it. This is saying that it's stone. If I switch it to wood, it'll make it look a little bit different. This is aging leather, and so you can make it, this is silver or iron, and so that'll add rust to it. So you can give it like a generic kind of edge to it, or excuse me, the generic kind of underlying material to it, where, you know, so over here, what I'm going to do is I want to weather this, but I'm going to say this is some sort of iron or metal or whatever. And then, and actually just to come back here real quick, I definitely don't want this kind of, you know, nastiness on my material, especially on these new homes. We don't want to make it look like in, you know, 100 years. But what's really nice is by just knocking the weathering up just a little bit, you know, maybe to like a 0.1, what you're getting is these edges really start to come through and really start defining the edges. And just as an example of it, you can see it in this project right here. I weathered the stucco, and what was nice is it in the corners right here, it's really accenting these corners almost as if it's a line drawing. So you're really giving life to the detail of the project versus it starting to look a little flat. So that's where that really comes in handy. And if you do it to almost all your materials, it works out really nice. And if you've never used this edges, this will make these super hard edges, this corner right here, you can actually soften that up, which would be so much more typical of what's going on in real world. And so you see that as I pull this thing up, this corner starts softening up really well. So those are the two other big adjustments that I would make to any material. So we'll grab this. I'm going to call it iron. you can call it iron, aluminum, whatever, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to knock up the weathering just a little bit, and I'm going to knock the edges up just a little bit, just to soften these edges so they don't look so harsh. And that's really going to be it for the most part. I mean, that's like 99% of what you would need to do. And so now if we render this one out, and we'll call this one A4, we'll see if we might need to change the sun position to get a little bit better example to show what's going on, but let's just see what we got out of this. Where's my delete? Here we go. So I'm going to try and do this slow because I know there's a little bit of lag. So what you're looking at here, this is the SketchUp material brought in, and that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. And then this next one, this was, that's not letting me, I hate when it does that. That won't let you switch to the next. Oops. Let's see here. Yeah, so that's the SketchUp version. And now this is the SketchUp turned into a Lumion material. So that's the SketchUp, and then SketchUp to Lumion. And so that even right there, it just has a great jump to it. But now this is SketchUp turned into a Lumion, turned into a substance material, which is, you know, really getting even better. I think I need to change the sun to really hammer that home. And then this is that same material, but with a little bit of dirt added into it. And so you can really see how you can start to change the quality of the material. Yeah, so we go back to Lumion, and even just to like our preview mode here, if I can change my sun. I think I need to change the height. Too much. Yeah, I mean, anyway, like you can start to see it on the side of the box, just the way that we can control the glossiness now. It's just really, to me, I think kind of changes what we're able to do. Oop, too far down. Didn't mean to do that. So anyway, so that's kind of like the overall picture of what we're talking about doing. But what's really interesting is, let me go back to here. This is actually a great one. This actually will create normal maps for you. So in fact, let me just download, say, this brick material. And there we go. So I have this JPEG that we just downloaded. Now what I could do is go to this website and drop that brick material in here, and there's a normal map that's creating for you. And from here you can, this is giving you a preview on this side of what that normal map is doing. You know, it's a little much, so maybe you change the strength down a little bit, the level. You can play with all this kind of stuff, you know, the blurriness, the sharpiness of it. If you need to invert the height, if it's going, you know, if your mortar is sticking out versus sticking in, you can swap the heights. But anyway, I mean, there's your map that it could create for you. You would need to obviously tweak this a little bit more, but it's the idea that you can really create your own um, your own normal map online, just to be aware of it. Uh, so just to grab show another one. I mean, if you come here to woods, I mean, there's all kinds of amazing woods, and so I'm going to show you one real quick that is really impressive in my mind. Make sure I open the right one. So since I got a bunch of different woods, I think it's this one here. Excuse me. So what's really cool about this particular one is here's a wood with a fantastic wood grain. And again, you can change a lot of things about this. Like I can change the underlying wood color. So if I needed something a little bit more blonde, if I wanted something darker, go to more like a wenge or an oak or a pine. Again, I can make any kind of wood that I want in here with this particular material just by changing the RGB color. Here's a nice cherry color, whatever it is. Let me go to something light just so the next piece I can really show. So there you go. You can change that. You can change the details of the wood. So you can see that there's some like little divots, these tiny little detailed divots you can add in, take off the scratches that are in here. So if I bring it all the way down right in here, this looks really nice and clean, but if I bring the scratches all the way up, you can see that this has almost like it's been a sanded kind of look. So you can really control that. But the really, really super impressive thing to me about this one is this battens right here. If I click the battens, I now instantly have my own wood floor. I can change to go from a wood texture to a wood floor texture. I now can control how wide how long the boards are or how short they are, and then make them super fat versus super skinny. So I can control all of that inside of here, the chamfer at which these are taken at, the gap. So everything is controlled inside of here. So again, this one material, I can make 100 materials, and in this, just like we did before, I have. Let me make this. Just go to 2K just for our purposes. You can see I create my normal map, my glossiness map, the roughness and metallic we don't use, but this one actually has ambient occlusion. And so we'll do this one real quick just to show you what that is, or how that would work. Now I've already exported all this stuff out, so I'm not going to waste the time in doing that. But inside of Photoshop, I'm going to show you one thing. I've already shown you how to do the glossiness inside of the normal map, but here, let's see, make sure I'm opening the right one. Yeah, I think. Nope, I need the other version. So we've already done it before, again, with the glossiness and the normal, so I'm going to ignore that. But this time, I've exported out the diffuse. That's not what I want. I thought I had the one with battens. Looks like I need to export them out real quick. I mean, it's super easy, so let's do that real quick. So export out, because I didn't have what I was looking for, but I just want diffuse. Since I'm using diffuse, I don't need base color. I already have my normal. I already have all these other ones. I really just want to look at ambient occlusion and diffuse, so I'm just going to export those out real quick, just to show you how those work. And so now here's my diffuse map. Why is this not? You know what? I know why. Like, so the diffuse map, this is my background, my JPEG at what that is the underlying color of what we're dealing with. And the ambient occlusion, similar to the glossiness and the normal, how we combined them we're going to do the same thing with ambient occlusion, and that's really going to help bring this underlying material, look even better. So all I did was move my ambient occlusion on top of the diffuse map. And here, just like everything else we do in Photoshop, if you just turn this into a multiply layer, now we have this ambient occlusion, which is kind of giving those nooks and crannies to this a little nicer. You can always drop the opacity if it's too harsh, and control the opacity to what you want. Maybe I'll do something like that. And then this, I'm just going to flatten it and save. And this time I would call it diffuse, and then again underscore with AO for ambient occlusion. So now I know I have a diffuse map and a diffuse with ambient occlusion. Actually, I do want to export out. Oh, actually, no. What's actually really neat, just trying to think through this, I had exported out this diffuse, which has, this much more blonde color wood. I also have this diffuse, which is this more like cherry colored wood. I can actually use this same normal with gloss because this has nothing to do with the color. This only has to deal with heights and glossiness. So I don't need to bring out the new one, because now inside of Lumion, I'm just going to grab, say, this material. We'll call it a standard. Take a second, and then I want to choose a color map. So you can see I can even do this without having brought it into SketchUp first. This is just a color from SketchUp that I'm playing with. So here I'm going to grab my diffuse with ambient occlusion. And the only thing I'm really going to have to do here, since this wasn't a SketchUp material first, is because in SketchUp I deal with the scale of the material, where here I need to deal with the scale. And the reasons why it's yellow is because colorization is set to half. If I get rid of colorization, then it goes back to the wood color. But now I need to up the scale of this thing, and if I pull the scale up, I can find whatever it is that I need. I typically like to bring the SketchUp version in first, because I can control the scale of it much more accurately, but this will work for our purposes. So there's our diffuse color brought in with the ambient occlusion. So now we have this really nice wood floor, but I want to bring in the normal map. So I'm going to come to the normal map I created for the other version and bring it in, this normal with gloss. And again, this has nothing to do with the underlying color. It only has to do with the wood itself, although the bad thing is the scales are different because of this scale. That would be the only issue. So you can see that my normal map is not lining up with my underlying color, and it's because they weren't brought in at the same scale. But in fact, let me, just out of curiosity, let me do this real quick. If you guys have never done this, if you hit this button here, that gets rid of anything that you've done on that material. So I'm going to try and do this from the beginning real quick, and then we'll wrap this class up. So I'm going to do this, bring in my diffuse, and I'm not going to change anything yet, and I'm going to bring in the normal. And now the scales should all work. Nope, they're off again. So maybe you do need to export out the same version. But either way, the idea is that you can see that this wood, maybe I want to leave it glossy to get rid of some of the reflectivity, and maybe up the relief. And I'm going to call this wood and do some weathering on the wood, and that just kind of darkens some areas up. I'm going to soften the edges, and there you go. I mean, this is a pretty darn good looking wood, and we can now control the color of it, the size of the battens, all that kind of stuff with just one material. So even if I come here And we will store this camera and render this out just to see what it looks like. And again, this is without any effects even added to this thing. I mean, there you go. It's a pretty good looking wood, and we can make it even better. And there's always things that we can do to continually make it better. So, you know, it's past 1 o'clock, so we're going to end. But this is the beginning of like these advanced materials. We'll kind of do a little bit more again next week, and then how we can pull all the lighting and everything in to start creating a scene that can really take these materials even further, because everything is based off of lighting. That's really the critical part of any model, is the lighting that goes on. So next week we can talk more about these materials and more about the lighting. So I know this was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. This is probably the most technical class that we've had, but I really wanted you guys just to even see where this stuff was coming from, the technical side of things, to understand why we were doing certain things. But really, the average day-to-day workflow, you're not even have to understand or worry about the technical background pieces of it, but know that where materials came from and put them in, and understand the control that you can and do have over materials and make things even better. So this is definitely a class that you'll probably want to go back and watch again, and just, you know, once you start getting in materials, and really even once you start a new model, feel free to talk to me and have me, you know, walk you through bringing a material in or whatever to make your model look even better. So anyway, I hope this wasn't too much at once, but this is super exciting stuff, and is really starting to up our quality of renderings in the last couple of weeks quite a bit. So anyway, that's it for right now. We definitely have more that we can talk about materials later, but I think that's enough for right now. Yep, guys. All right, take care.